Welcome to The Explainer. You know, right at the heart of the Christmas story, there's this 2,700-year-old mystery, and today we're going to crack it wide open. It's this incredible story about war, a king who's absolutely terrified, and it all comes down to a single, really controversial word in a famous prophecy. All right, let's just jump right into the main piece of evidence here. For hundreds of years, if you picked up an English Bible, it would translate Isaiah 7:14 using the word virgin. Simple enough, right? But then in 1952, this hugely influential translation, the Revised Standard Version, came out and used young woman instead. And whoa, that one change kicked off this massive theological debate that, believe it or not, is still going on today. So what's the deal? Is it virgin or young woman? To figure this out, we can't just, look it up in a dictionary. Nope, we've got to put on our detective hats and actually travel back in time to a kingdom that was right on the edge of complete collapse. Okay, so our story starts in Jerusalem, way back around 735 BC, and we're dropping right into the middle of some really intense political drama. I mean, the fate of the entire nation is basically hanging on the choices of just one guy, King Ahaz of Judah. So here's the setup. You've got two kingdoms up north, Syria and Israel, and they've teamed up. Their big idea is to get King Ahaz to join their fight against this terrifying, rising superpower, the Assyrian Empire. But Ahaz says no. So what do? They decide they're just going to invade Judah and put a puppet king on the throne who will cooperate. The guy is totally, completely trapped. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some political squabble. This was a crisis of pure terror. This line from Isaiah, it just captures the mood perfectly. The whole kingdom was just seized by this collective panic. A fear so deep it felt like a storm literally shaking the trees. And that is the desperate situation where this prophecy is born. So it's right at this moment, at the absolute peak of all this fear, that the prophet Isaiah shows up and confronts King Ahaz. But he's not there to offer military strategy. Nope, he offers a challenge, a really critical choice between two totally different kinds of power. Isaiah's message just cuts right through all the political games. He basically tells Ahaz, look, forget about the armies you can see. You need to trust in the promise you can't see, God's promise to protect the royal line of David. It was a call to put your chips on faith, not on alliances with other armies. And this is where it gets really clever. In the original Hebrew, Isaiah uses this brilliant pun. See, the words for stand firm in faith and stand at all come from the exact same root as the word amen. So he's essentially saying, if you don't amen in God, you won't be amen. Like no faith, no fixity. It's just this powerful, poetic warning. But Ahaz, he just can't bring himself to trust in, this airy thing called theology. So when God, through Isaiah, offers him literally any sign he wants, anything at all, to prove he'll protect him, Ahaz says no. And why would he do that? Well, it's because he's already made up his mind. He's secretly raiding the temple treasury and sending all the gold to the Assyrian king, basically saying, help me, I'm your servant. And sure, it's a band-aid solution that works for a bit. But that one decision, it ends up bringing the whole devastating Assyrian army right to his doorstep just a few decades later. Okay, so now that we have all that backstory about the terrified, faithless king Ahaz, we can finally get back to Isaiah's prophecy. And this brings us right to the main event, the central piece of our whole linguistic puzzle, that original Hebrew word. The word Isaiah uses is Alma. Now, its basic definition, what you'd find in a lexicon, isn't virgin. It just means a young woman of marriageable age. And that is the core of the entire debate. You see, an Alma was probably assumed to be a virgin in that culture, but the word itself doesn't lock it in. It doesn't guarantee it. And this is a really, really important point that scholars like Dr. Marv make. Back in the ancient world, there was no single word in any language that all by itself meant virgo intacta, an untouched maiden in our modern clinical sense. The meaning of a word like alma depended completely on the context it was in. And this slide just illustrates the point perfectly. Take a look at these other words. Betula, it's often translated as virgin, right? But in the book of Joel, it's used to describe a woman who's married and mourning her husband. And then there's parthenos, the Greek word used for Mary in the New Testament. Well, in the Greek version of the Old Testament, that same word is used to describe Dinah after she was assaulted. So it's pretty clear these words had a way broader meaning than we tend to think. So the question is, how did an ancient writer make it absolutely crystal clear they were talking about a virgin? Well, they had to add extra phrases. For example, in Genesis, when describing Rebekah, the text says she was a Betula, and then it adds, and no man had known her. It doesn't just rely on the one word. And this is precisely what the New Testament does for Mary. It adds not one, not two, but three different clarifying phrases just to make sure there's absolutely no doubt. All right, so if the original word Alma just meant young woman, is that it's case closed? Well, not quite. See, this linguistic detective work doesn't actually end the story. Instead, it opens the door to a much richer, more complex way of thinking about prophecy. A lot of scholars talk about something called sensus plenior, which is just a fancy way of saying a fuller sense. The idea is that this prophecy actually had two fulfillments. First, there was an immediate one for King Ahaz. The sign was the birth of a child right then and there. It might have even been Isaiah's own son. And it was a guarantee that his enemies were about to be defeated. But then centuries later, Christians saw that same prophecy having a deeper, ultimate fulfillment in the birth of Jesus. And here's the key takeaway. These two meanings don't cancel each other out. The first one was a sign of God's immediate help, for a very specific political crisis. The second one was a sign of God's ultimate presence, coming into the world to save it. It's like one was a historical preview of the other. So, okay, we've gone deep into ancient politics, Hebrew linguistics, theology, the whole shebang. So what's the big takeaway from our 2,700-year-old detective story? It all comes down to this. Context is king. Really understanding King Ahaz's desperate situation doesn't weaken the later Christian interpretation at all. In fact, it makes it richer. It shows us that this isn't some static one-and-done story. It's something that unfolds across history, picking up deeper and fuller meaning as time goes on. And it's a powerful reminder that behind every grand prophecy, there's a real human story, stuck in a specific time and place, that ends up echoing in ways the people who first heard it could never, ever have imagined.